One of the things we have to take a look at as farmers each year, corn farmers, is what we're going to use for herbicide programs to control not only difficult weeds, but just really anything, even simple things like green foxtail. How are we going to do it this year?
Well, let's talk about that. You know, we're raising a grass crop, which is corn, and you think about the toughest weeds that we're going to have to control are going to be the grasses. Now, you bring up an easy one, Brian.
Yeah,
green foxtail. That's not that tough a weed for me.
It's
but
not Roundup resistant, Darren.
Well, I don't know about that. You just don't know, Brian. But right now in our area, the green foxtail is not Roundup resistant, and we can control it with a small, low rate of Roundup, Brian. Maybe $1 a Roundup, $1.50 Roundup. Why do we need anything else?
Well, the reason why we need something else is because any weed that comes out of the ground, especially green foxtail, once that emerges, it is robbing nutrients, it's robbing water from your crop, and the studies have shown that if you get your weeds, you get very many weeds up to an inch or two, you're going to have serious yield loss. A lot of times you're talking 3 to 5 bushels. And right away you might say, oh, that's not serious yield loss. Well, it is when corn is worth a lot of money.
Well, you start with green foxtail because that's typically one of the earlier grasses that's going to come in the spring in our part of the world. Then you get later on in the season, you have other things. You have challenging grasses like yellow foxtails, woolly cupgrass, field sandbur. There's a number of different grasses that come later that are tough.
All right, so let's get specific. What are you going to recommend? So a farmer comes in, corn farmer in the upper Midwest, and says, hey, I've got to have a good overall herbicide program. I don't want to just use Roundup. What do you suggest he does?
Well, first of all, you have to start with a good pre-emerge soil residual herbicide. So what we'll do is go out early before we even plant the crop and put on something like, for grass control, we would use out of the family Harness, Surpass, Dual, Outlook, those types of products down. Now with the advent of Roundup Ready crops and how fast they've been adopted, you look at different combination products that also control some broadleaf weeds in there too, because if you get out early in the season, you need a little bit of residual for both, otherwise you're just right back in spraying your Roundup.
And we used to say, let's just put the grass herbicide down, we'll kill the broadleaves post-emerge. You can still do that if you want to, but we do have a number of pre-emerge options now. Sure Start, there's Verdict, there's Balance Flex you can use that's very good on broadleaves pre-emerge.
Well, the new product Triple Flex, Brian.
Yeah, I love all these new products. Triple Flex is just Monsanto's version of Sure Start, and Sure Start is nothing more than Surpass and Hornet.
Well, so you may say, why would I use one versus the other? And there are some slight differences between these products.
Yeah, but the biggest thing that I look at anymore is how about the rebate money? So if you've already bought your Roundup, you bought Weather Max or Power Max, you're probably going to want to go with Harness or Triple Flex because you're going to get $1 to $1.50 rebate.
The way I look at it is you have to look at what weeds you have, and if those programs don't control all of your weeds, then choose something else. You're not going to care about spending an extra $1, $1.50 if you aren't getting your weeds under control.
Well, I don't worry about that too much because if I don't kill them all pre-emerge, then I can follow post-emerge. Roundup is still great on our farm.
Like we've talked about with Roundup-resistant weeds, you have to manage it as part of a program. Yep. Now you say, Triple Flex may not get all of my weeds. That's fine. It doesn't have to, as long as Roundup is still a useful tool.
But even if Roundup isn't that useful, I mean, it kills some of the weeds, but not all of them, you can throw in some Status. I really like that. If you say, well, I just have all kinds of weeds, you don't even know what you have exactly, Status will control just about anything. Callisto and Loudus are very good, but they're a little bit weaker on wild buckwheat that we have in our region and a little bit weaker on thistle than what Status would be as well.
The thing for me that I look at, and getting back to the Roundup, is let's say you have grasses that are resistant, like Johnson grass and barnyard grass in the southern part of the country. That's where you end up with a problem. If you've got resistant grasses, now that grass pre-emerge residual product is very, very important, and you may be putting on some more residual later in the season to try and help you hold some of those grasses down. Or you could switch to Liberty Link corn, you could switch and just use a conventional product like maybe Accent, but you have to get out there early. The problem with those other herbicides is their timing is so much different than Roundup. With Roundup, you can kill larger grasses. With something like Ignite or with Accent, you've got to get those grasses when they're smaller if you want to have the best luck.
So one of the things we've debated is, what are you going to use for a pre-emerge rate? What are you going to use for a post-emerge rate with these different products? So let's put it real simply. So on our farm, for example, last year we used some Harness. We used it at a half rate. We had some grass come back on us late in the season. In those fields, And certainly around the borders of fields, we'll always up that rate of harness. So we might even run full rate around the borders in some fields and a half rate in the rest of the field. Roundup will clean stuff up. If you want to, you could bump your rate of Status or Callisto up to a full rate too, rather than using a half rate along with the Roundup.
Well, the great thing, when we're talking about those pre's, now we can vary the rate as we go through the field. When you have variable rate controls on your sprayer, that is so valuable. And you think about it, out in a part of the field where you know your field and you just don't ever have weeds over in this area, well, don't go with a super high rate. You don't need it. Or if you have a lighter, sandier soil like we're standing in right here, you can vary that rate down because you don't need a super high rate when you're in sandy soils.
Yep. But again, what I would do is I would always use a higher rate around the borders of the fields, around waterways, anywhere you've had problems in the past with weeds. You just want to have a little more residual.
Well, there are a lot of different choices when we look at weed control in corn, but the important thing is to get great control early in the season. That's where a lot of that yield is made in corn, and also keep that control throughout the season so you don't allow Roundup resistant weeds to get going in your farm, or for other weeds to get going where they're going to put seed out there and be more problems for you in the future.
Well, you mentioned Roundup resistant weeds is our Weed of the Week. One of those we'll tell you coming up next.